I've always told my wife, like, when we have kids, I want to get them back into BMX racing because, like, for me, you learn so much more than just the bike side of things. Like, it's the community. It's a team sport where you have a bike team, but it's also an individual sport. So like you're individually pushing yourself to do better and to be faster. And there's like the competition side of things, but you might be competition with your buddy on the start gate, but when you get to the finish line, you're both are like, yeah, that was sick. Like, good job. Like, that was really cool. And I'd say you learn a lot of valuable lessons of just like, working hard pays off and training pays off. And a lot of stuff just doesn't come super easily for a lot of people. So that, putting in effort and having something come from that is like key to where, you don't really learn a lot of those skills until you're working. And I would say BMX kind of gives you those skills at a younger age.
BMX Breakthrough is bridging the gap from old school to new school, from tracks to manufacturers, from new riders to their local tracks, and it doesn't stop at racing, but the mission is to connect people with bikes. Join me, Jay Oaks, as I interview key people in the sport and in the industry that are involved in their local circles, in their communities, at their local tracks, and aiming to make a difference on a local level. You'll hear stories, marketing tips, failures, successes, and a way to make a difference in your local BMX community. Let's dive in as we kick off this next episode. Well, Scotty, you've been around BMX for a really long time, and in all different ways, shapes, and forms, and then even mountain bike stuff. But you and I don't know if you remember this. You and I grew up racing together.
Yep.
Okay, so I actually have no recollection of racing with you at all. It's all from my dad. And he's the one that's told me that, yeah, you and Scotty used to race together. And I'm like, I don't remember that at all. Um, but we both grew up racing. And then I think your racing career was like pretty short, probably just a few years before you started getting into like the freestyle stuff, right?
Yes and no. I started bike racing when I was 4,
Okay.
and I raced pretty consistently until I was like 13, and then I took a little hiatus, and then I came back until I was 16. And then around that time, I got out of racing and went really deep into the freestyle side of BMX. And that's kind of what captivated me and really kept me in the scene. Um, and I would say I was BMX only core until I was like 20 something years old. And then that's when trail building kind of took part, and that led to, mountain biking, BMX, kind of anything with wheels.
That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, because yeah, so you actually had, I mean, you had a much longer stint in racing than I did, and probably just maybe we just didn't overlap quite as much. But yeah, I was actually telling somebody the other day, you would have grown up racing at the Burlington BMX track, which like I just have so many memories of because like looking back on it, it just was such a cool and unique track.
Yeah, they literally just plowed the old Skagit cycle, and there's a road through where the track used to be. And now anytime I'd go down Burlington Boulevard, I'm like, I used to race right over there. Like,
It's pretty cool. Yeah, so what about like BMX racing? Obviously that did keep your attention for longer than I was aware of, but like what was it about BMX racing? And then we'll move into the freestyle side, but BMX racing as a whole, what was it that like got your attention, that kept your attention, and that you really enjoyed about that?
I would say because I got into BMX racing so early, in the beginning, it was a lot of my dad was into racing, and he was helping out at the track and helping do dig days at Burlington. So I kind of followed in my dad's footsteps and got into the bike racing scene. But once I was into racing, that's where I built like the whole community of friends, and all of my close friends came from the track. And anything I wanted to do outside of school was related to the track. And just like having that friendship and community was definitely what kept me involved.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think I talk to people about the community of BMX, and I think it's such a unique community. in and of itself with how tight knit it can become. But then also how inclusive it can be of new people coming in, which is super cool.
I agree. I would say it's one of those sports that, you go somewhere and you don't know anyone and you're like, hey, you ride bikes? I ride bikes. Like, we're gonna hang out. And you're like, do you want to stay at my house? Like, it's pretty
That's
amazing.
That's awesome that you say that because multiple people have heard me say in different episodes that I like it's one of the sports where you could fly. You're in Northwest Washington, which is where I'm from, and like you could go over to Florida, meet somebody for the first time, and you talk about BMX, and they're like, "Do you want to sleep on my floor?" And
Yeah.
and in no other sport, it's not like somebody's like, "Hey, your kid plays Little League. You played Little League. You want to sleep on my floor?" Like that will never
Yeah.
happen.
No, that would never, you would get the weirdest looks.
Yeah. But in BMX, it's just totally normal.
I feel like the community's so small, that like anytime you meet another fellow BMXer, you're like, yo, we're friends now. Like, sweet.
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, so you moved from the racing side of things, and then you started getting into freestyle, which is really where I remember I remember watching you ride, and you're, I think, a couple of years younger than me, and just watching your skill continuously progress. Um, but but I mean, you stuck with a 20-inch wheel for a really long time. And so what was it about like going into the freestyle side of things that was so captivating to you?
I would say it was kind of a slow transition. Um, as you probably remember, a lot of the tracks that you would travel to had skate parks next to or nearby. And I would say there for the last couple years of racing, I would bring both bikes and I would go and I'd practice, and then in between practice, I would run over to the skate park and I would do some laps at the skate park. And there for a while, my dad's like, "You gotta stay at the track," and I'm like, "I want to go jump, like I want to go catch some air." And I would say kind of the community of BMX is what kept me in BMX, but switching to freestyle was kind of that outlet of expression and being able to kind of be yourself and translate that into your riding, but not necessarily just how fast you are.
Yeah. What was the transition for you like going from, because obviously racing when you're jumping it's low and fast, and freestyle and especially the stuff that you ride now is very different from that. And like for me, I've always had this like mental barrier, and I've always had such a hard time getting over the low and fast style. So for you, was it like liberating and freeing, or did you have to push yourself past that point?
I would say there's definitely a little bit of both. Um, I would say the racing side of things gave me the bike control that I needed and the comfortability of riding dirt, which I feel like that's why I really fell in love with trail building and riding in the woods, because it was kind of that same feeling of racing where you're riding in the woods with your friends and the community and it's dirt, but it's not, you know, as competitive. It's more like uplifting and everybody's just trying to ride and have fun. And the jumps, I feel like naturally kind of somewhere along there, I just naturally started pulling up more than pushing through. And I think racing in general gives you that, bike control. Um, but I don't know. I just, from an early age, fell in love with going high.
That's awesome. And I have heard, I mean, you've got some trails that you guys would have been working on for probably 15 years now.
Yeah, I think it's on like 13 or 14 years now, the Shire trails.
Okay. Yeah, it's a ton of time that you guys have invested into these. And I have never been out there, but I have heard that they are just massive.
Yeah, they're not small. I would
I-
say they're on average like 6 to 8 foot tall lips and 10-foot landings and 25-foot gaps or so.
That's awesome. And they're all pristine. So where did that like okay, so obviously just about anywhere it's hard to find trails. Like a lot of the spots have been they've been logged, they've been dozed, they've been cleared for houses, whatever. And so having a place for building trails and to be able to actually go and ride is so hard to find. So you guys just built your own. And so, but how did that start?
Man, that's just kind of like a wild story on its own because when I moved from down south to Bellingham when I graduated high school, I was still riding mostly skate parks and kind of going to the racetrack. And I had my friend group. But when I moved to Bellingham, I met these guys that were like half mountain bikers, half BMXers, and they had some jumps up off Academy Road. And I started going out there and riding with them. And the jumps actually got plowed from the city like a year or two after I started going. And that kind of gave us as a crew like really good motivation to start and find a new location. And that's ultimately what started Shire was we were looking for somewhere to build a new set of trails to replace our old set of trails and just somewhere that we could all, be in the woods, hanging out, playing in the dirt.
That's cool. And they've progressed a lot over the years, but and you've had some really cool people that have like shown up at your trails. Like I ran into I think that would have been like summer of 23. I was down in Valencia or Santa Clarita, California at the skate park and I hadn't followed BMX too closely, or the freestyle side of things, and these guys show up, and I'm like, that guy looks so familiar. Well, it was Hoder, and he had been up to your trails, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, and anyway, there's quite a few like iconic people in the sport of BMX that have been out to your trails, which is probably pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Like the fact that our crew of, five dudes started these trails back in the day. And I would say now the crew that's running the Shire is like 15 plus people. And the community has really grown and kind of adopted everyone that wants to be a part of it. When we first started Shire, I would have never dreamed where it's at now. Um, we would throw a jam every summer, and like the jams would have like 20 people in the beginning, and the last couple years we stopped doing jams around COVID, but the last one before COVID we had like 650 people come.
Wow. That is so many people.
Yeah, it gets a little out of control, and that's kind of where we it became so big that we could kind of no longer do Shire Jam as it was, and we kind of moved that into doing smaller jams with groups of people that are from out of town. And if someone's coming to town, we would do a little networking and try to get like 50 people, and that way there's like manageable size of groups.
Yeah. Yeah, because that just gets, I mean, unruly at that point. And yeah, that's a wild number of people to come out and be able to wrangle and also to be able to like maintain because all of your stuff is hand built out there, isn't it?
Yes and no.
Oh, okay.
The When our spot got plowed on Academy, we kind of were starting from ground zero. We brought an excavator out, and Spencer Baldwin, he got that excavator from his dad, and he brought it out. And I would say we did about a week of machine work, and then it was a few years of hand digging, and then we brought a machine out again and did a couple days and added another line, and then I would say it's been hand dug for the last handful of years, but 99% by hand, and then we got the piles stacked with a machine.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, but all of it's formed by hand. It's and it sounds like
Finished by
really
hand.
really
Yep.
just like the prep of it going into the machine and then from there it's all hand built.
Yeah, correct.
So that's cool. Um that's awesome. Well then, okay, so again, your love of BMX has just like continued on and where a lot of people see see a burnout or like, I mean, I just stepped away from racing for a while, but I always played around on my BMX bike, but I never had like the desire to stay in it or to progress and push the way that you have, which has been really fun to watch from afar and everything. But you turned that into your a current company, and you're doing some really cool things. So will you talk about Shire Built?
Yeah, so me and Spencer, um, there was a group of five of us. It was Andy and Derek and Ian and Spencer and I, and we started Shire, and like, Shire progressed as we talked about. But over the time, I started working for Spencer and we were doing construction together. And whenever a job would come up, we would go and do these volunteer days, and we would go and volunteer at the dirt jumps, or we would go help build the local pump track or whatever that may be. And Bellingham put out for bid uh, the waterfront pump track a handful of years ago. And we were like, all right, we need an LLC to bid this job because we can't volunteer on it. We need to actually have a company. And me and Spencer got together and started Shire Built. And once we started Shire Built, it was still kind of like doing projects on the side, but doing construction full time. And I would say over like a year, it led to about 50-50. And we were like, we can't continue to do construction and bike stuff. Like there's so much bike stuff to do that it slowly just became. And then a few years ago, we just jumped fully into doing bike trails and pump tracks, and which now, I would never believe you before, but I just build bike trails for a living, and it's pretty awesome.
That sounds pretty surreal. Is it still wild to tell people that?
Yeah. And it's still like people are like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a trail builder. And they're like, what? Like, what do you mean? I'm like, I just build bike trails. Like, that's all I do is travel around and build bike trails, build pump tracks, build skate parks, build whatever that people ride bikes on.
Which is super cool. You've also done some hand digging at Rampage for a few years.
Yep. I last year was my third year doing Rampage, and I've done Rampage now for two different riders. And Spencer did Rampage one year for another rider, and that's been slowly growing and growing, and that's a whole nother ball game on its own.
So we see on Instagram, you see builders, and I've seen yours. I've seen, I guess, a couple other riders that have posted about their build process. It looks so glamorous on on Instagram because we post like the highlights of it and stuff. But I
Yeah,
would assume that those are grueling days.
those are long, hot, grueling days. They're, I would say it's really fun, and everyone that's there is very involved in core. Like, you're not there if you don't love the sport and love building and love riding. But I would say you're up from you get there in the dark and you leave in the dark every single day. It's like 80 to 90 degrees. It's full on dusty. And, everyone is giving it their 110% to create these lines. And it, it's one of the events that I always tell people that ask me about it. I'm like, if you don't go and see it for yourself, like you can't really comprehend the level off watching videos.
It makes sense. I mean, yeah, I think some of the point of view cameras that we have, and I think the 360 cameras have helped a lot to kind of intensify what you see on screen for those trails. But I mean, everything looks smaller, and you learn that quickly as a kid when you're like, I want to hit this jump and take a picture.
Yep.
And then you're like, oh man, that felt way higher. That was like 6 inches off the ground.
Yes,
um,
exactly.
and so like with Rampage, it's like, okay, if it looks kind of daunting or pretty daunting, I can only imagine what it's actually like. And I mean, you and I were talking about some of those runs, like some of the landings and some of the run-ins, they're just insanely steep. And so I would assume that like even when you're from the building side of things, is that you're even trying to just keep your balance while you're building.
Yeah, and I would say Rampage is one of those things that's like being a professional builder, I'm always trying to think about like speed management and, trail speed and like the flow of the trail and not being too fast or too slow. The thing that people don't understand that makes Rampage so hard is they're going down a vertical mountain. And from feature to feature, there is no like trail speed. They are braking heavily between each feature, and each feature has a different speed into it. So, like, you could look at some of these features and be like, oh, this one's set up pretty good, but there's a 100-foot cliff on this side and a 100-foot cliff on that side. But you need to land this 30-foot drop and then literally stop, turn, and go down another 30-foot drop.
That is wild to think about. Like, it's that's pretty crazy. Like, I mean, just the skill that's required not only to ride it, but even in your building efforts of it, because building trail building is something that I can't do. Like, I mean, I tried to build a pump track I've tried to build a couple of them at our houses, and it's amazing how even the spacing, like for me, I always need to space things apart much further than visually I think I need to. And so there's a lot that goes into that. But for you, like, you've spent a lot of time now building pump tracks, building dirt jumps and stuff. But when you're building stuff for public spaces, obviously you're dialing things back quite a bit. What is that? What does some of that process look like from the planning to the execution of building a public pump track look like?
I would say that's kind of a broad spectrum because I would say some of the times the projects we're going into, go out to bid and someone had previously designed the pump track, but we'll bid that job and then typically we try to add our flair to it. And, within the footprint of what the layout is, it kind of looks like the layout, but we change like the whole straightaways and we change all the rollers and change it all to, be kind of our style and feel like our track rather than, a pre-designed track. But I would say an interesting perspective is like me growing up BMX racing, I rode a lot of tracks that have a lot of rollers and a lot of berms. And my partner, Spencer, he grew up downhill racing. So he got into BMX and that's how we met. But we both have racing backgrounds with different bikes. So that kind of we have different perspectives on how the speed can get there and what you need to pump, but we have the same like end vision. So it's kind of nice to be able to like double check each other with different views, but kind of have the same vision.
That's awesome. Yeah, to be able to bounce back and forth on ideas too. And probably I would assume that the different perspectives probably play into some really cool collaboration that comes out of it.
Yeah, and exactly. And I would say without the BMX racing background, I would not be able to build pump tracks the way I do because when we start roughing out a pump track, there's a lot of visualization. Like we'll move the dirt and then I'll stand in the berm and I'll like visualize riding the berm and where I'll be going and what the speed will feel like. And I'm like, okay, if I come out of this berm and hit this roller, do I need another roller or do I want to change the direction or, kind of like visualizing the feel of the track. So then you kind of, when it's done, it feels like you thought it would feel.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think coming from the BMX background is you also have like a good BMX track, you should be able to pump all the way around. And
Correct.
so that probably feeds a lot into your building of pump tracks too, is that tracks that and features that don't actually have flow and versus ones that do.
Yep. And I would say, BMX racing, there's always a lot of pedaling because you're trying to go as fast as you can. And that kind of translated to really good BMX trails. I feel like should have no pedaling and no braking, should just drop in and ride the trails. And that I feel like is important for a pump track. Like kids of all sizes should be able to make it around the track with minimal effort.
That's cool. I like that. So, getting into the building side of things, like, did you ever have a long-term vision of turning this into a career, or was it just something for fun?
It it was always just a pure passion project for me. Like I never I never expected that I would be building trails full time because I liked what I was doing as a machinist and a fabricator, and it was fun. And I would get out of work, and that was kind of like my escape, was going to the woods and hanging out and building, and kind of like a expression of art per se, where the dirt is the canvas and I have a shovel for my tool. But yeah, I would have never imagined that we'd be where we are now.
That's pretty cool. So you guys have built the waterfront in Bellingham was a dirt pump track. I believe the Marysville pump track was all asphalt, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And we've
Um,
done a handful of asphalt tracks now.
okay. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I remember talking to your wife about that. Like, you were putting in a proposal, and she was like, the catch is that it's like, in order to get experience, you have to have built some, but in order to get the job to build some, you have to have had experience. And with the asphalt pump tracks. And so I remember talking to her, and it was like, it was this weird dichotomy of like, you can't get the jobs without already having had the jobs.
Yeah, it was definitely, there was some weird monopolies going on that when we got into trail building that we found out. And it was, we were already doing asphalt roads and patch jobs, doing construction. So like we weren't new around asphalt, and we were already building pump tracks, just all dirt. And Marysville was actually our first one, and we won the job. And I won't name the company, but this other company that lost to us started being like, they're not qualified, they can't build it, you need to take their bid out. They don't have expertise, they've never done an asphalt pump track. And thankfully, the project manager and engineer at Marysville were like, no, we know Shire Built can build trails. We've had them do civil jobs. We've seen them do asphalt. Like, they can accomplish this job. And that was our first, which was like a good foot in the door. Like, we were pretty lucky to have that. And once we had one, then we kind of, the next city, we were like, hey, look, we've already done one. We've already done all this asphalt jobs. Like, we've already done all these pump tracks. So now that we have a handful of asphalt jobs under our belt, we don't really miss the opportunity when, they're like, you need to do X amount of pump tracks in the last few years. We're like, we've done it.
That's awesome. Finally to that point, and it's cool because it so many things do come back to who you know and the connections you have. And so it was just that project manager being able to back you up and reinforce, nope, these guys are legit. I trust them.
Exactly.
Which is cool.
So that was a huge help to get us to, another part of where we're at today.
That's awesome. So then you guys have done some mountain bike, like downhill mountain bike trails up in Bellingham.
Yep. Yeah. I don't even that's a whole nother side of it where like I don't know how it happened exactly, but like I said, when I moved to Bellingham, half the guys that I met BMX trail building also rode mountain bikes. And when I moved to town, I never touched a mountain bike before. I never thought about touching a mountain bike before. And there's just so many trails in Bellingham that it's kind of not easy to not ride mountain bikes. Like I went out with my buddies and I was like, oh, hey, this is actually kind of like BMX trail building and trail riding, but you got these big squishy bikes and you're going down a hill. And that just slowly led to building some mountain bike trails and building some BMX trails. And at that time, to me, it was just still trail building. Like, bikes aside, you're just out in the woods building jumps. So like that's where that passion side of things came in. Um, but then like the community of mountain biking is just like BMX, and it just grew and grew. And now I'm so grateful that I'm a part of the BMX community and the mountain bike community.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. And watching, I mean, obviously the skill on a BMX bike translates over to a mountain bike. And I tell people, like, I meet quite a few people that are out mountain biking, and they'll ask me about my riding, and though I've never been like, I can't do tricks, but I'm smooth. And that was one of the things that, like, I remember talking to Tom Fody about that, and like I was like, I can't do what you guys can do, and he's like, yeah, but you're smooth. And that's something that you have to learn from a BMX bike. And so then I'll talk to people and they go, how are you so smooth on the trail? And I'm like, and I tell people, go and buy a BMX bike or go and borrow a BMX bike and jump off of a curb, and you'll immediately find out how bad of a rider you are. And
Exactly. I feel, I've told people so many times, like, get out to the BMX track, learn how to ride a BMX bike. And riding a BMX bike has no suspension. It's got little wheels. It's got really tight, degrees and like geometry. So whatever you do 100% translates to what the bike does, where, these new mountain bikes are incredible. You can ride down a hill and the bike does a lot for you. So if you learn on that, the bike is actually doing a lot. Where if you learn on a BMX and go to a mountain bike, I still treat my mountain bike like a big BMX bike. It's just got a little bit of squish.
yeah, yeah. But if you make a mistake, if you case something on a BMX bike, or if you come up short with the front end, you're going to feel it. And on a mountain bike, sometimes you don't.
Exactly. Like, you still feel it on a mountain bike, but there's definitely more give where, like, the back wheel or front wheel will eat it with the suspension a little bit more, and it's got a little bit of safety net.
Yeah. Yeah. I've spent a couple of times like up at different trails. I remember this vividly at Bentonville, and there's one of the hubs that you roll in to go into one of the jump lines, and I'm sitting at the top, and there's a bunch of guys that are getting ready to go, and I'm sitting there, and I want to watch these guys roll in, and every single one of them, I think there was 4 or 5, and they scared me to death with their riding, because you could tell that they all grew up riding on full suspension mountain bikes, and they had no idea how to manage these jumps. And so it was like, just run into it, maybe do some preloading, and they're going to let the bike do everything. And then they come down so front end heavy, they case the landing with their front tire. And it's like, yeah, you haven't really learned how to ride. You're just letting this bike do everything.
Yeah. And that's where I would say, the BMX side of things is so steep and everything's up and down, where trail building for mountain biking is like, you kind of got to think half of your target audience are people of that nature. They're going to just ride down the trail and they're going to ride off this jump, and they're not going to do anything. They're going to just send it. So the jump kind of needs to be able to suit both people. Like, it needs to not be too steep. So, you could just ride off of it and make the gap, but it's also got to be steep enough that if you want to pull on it, you can pull on it and go high. And
Yeah. Which I've talked to a couple of people who have actually bragged on your ability to do that, of making a jump that's small if you want it to be, like a tabletop, for example. You can, the way that you have the eye and the ability to build a tabletop, that you can either pull on it and you can send it, or you can like speed jump it, or you can be a little kid rolling over it, and it fits all the riding styles pretty well.
yeah, and that's like, I would say ultimately that's been our biggest goal the last few years, is just refining the techniques to build these features that are suitable for everyone. Because I'd say for a long time, all I was trying to build was the biggest, gnarliest jumps. And, that was the passion for me, is what I wanted to do. But then building a jump and watching a kid jump it, and, seeing them have the feeling that I had when I was a kid is like just as rewarding now.
At this time, I want to give a special shout out and thank you to our 2025 sponsors who are helping us make the mission of BMX Breakthrough happen, which is to grow the sport at a local level. These sponsors, you can find more about them in the description, and then you can use their coupon codes. And you may be saying, I don't need a coupon code. but I would ask you, please use that coupon code as a way to help us all track what we're doing together. It helps them, it helps us, it helps everyone. So at our gold level, we have Box, Mongoose, and Pro Lids. At the silver level, we have Dan's Comp, LRC, and Pro Start. And at the bronze level, we have Command Aviation, Danger Snacks, Fly Racing, Gear Blocks, Justin Shepard Title Examiner, Lincoln Park BMX, Sign Dog Northwest, Sound Cedar Lumber, and Tasco. Once again, you can follow the links in our description to find out more about these phenomenal brands. You can find the coupon codes for some of them available there. And thank you so much to our 2025 sponsors. Now back to our episode.
What do you see as some of the things that BMX taught you and teaches kids in general, or people in general? We talked a little bit about the skills side of things, but outside of that, what are some of the things that you see BMX as contributing to the lives of other humans?
Man, like I've always told my wife, like when we have kids, I want to get them back into BMX racing because, like, for me, you learn so much more than just the bike side of things. Like it's the community, it's a team sport where you have a bike team, but it's also an individual sport. So like you're individually pushing yourself to do better and to be faster. And there's like the competition side of things, but you know, you might be competition with your buddy on the start gate, but when you get to the finish line, you're both are like, yeah, that was sick. Like, good job. Like that was really cool. And I'd say you learn a lot of valuable lessons of just like, you know, working hard pays off and training pays off. And a lot of stuff just doesn't come super easily for a lot of people. So that, you know, putting in effort and having something come from that is like key to where, you know, you don't really learn a lot of those skills until you're working. And I would say BMX kind of gives you those skills at a younger age.
That's cool. Yeah, I can relate with that. Was BMX, you talked about having to work for it and stuff. You started at BMX at 4, but was it something that you felt like came pretty naturally to you, or did you have to work pretty hard for it?
I would say BMX came half and half. Like I would say it came pretty naturally and I loved it. And like for being, you know, I was just super passionate about it, but also near the end, it was like a lot of training. And every day after school, I was riding rollers and lifting weights and trying to get faster because, you know, in that 15, 16 age group, it's really competitive. And that really like teaches you to push yourself, but like at the same time, you see the reward at the end of what you're pushing for.
Yeah. When you finally decided to be done, did you, with the BMX racing, did you feel like you faded out of it and like it kind of fizzled, or was it a hard stop? I'm just done with this.
It was kind of there's kind of an interesting story there too, because I was pretty diehard into the racing and training and going to nationals and trying to be the best I could when I was on the race team Diablos that I was on. And when I was a sophomore, junior in high school, I was actually diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And that kind of affected my training regimen. And I was no longer able to train as much as I was. And that kind of translated to me not riding the way I was before. And on the same note, though, I could go and ride the skate parks and the trails and like, you know, that side of riding was still the same, but I didn't necessarily need to train. I could just go and ride. And there for a while, like I said, I was bringing my both bikes to the racetracks, and my dad would take me and we'd go to the track, and then I'd be at the skate park and he'd be like, you need to get back over here for the main event. And, you know, I still remember to this day, we were at SeaTac and I just wanted to go ride the skate park. And my dad's like, are you here to race or do you want to go to the track? Like, I'm down for either, but like, you kind of got to decide. And I was like, you know, I want to do freestyle. Like, I want to just go in and like I'm down to go to the track still here and there, but like my main focus is I want to go to the skate park and go to the dirt jumps and go catch some air.
That's awesome. It's cool to hear how supportive he was. Your dad is actually one of our sponsors for the year. So
Yeah, he was telling me that. I told him that I was doing an interview, and he's like, "Heck yeah!" He's like, "I'm a sponsor for them." I was like, "Sweet."
that's cool. Yeah. So for people listening, that's Command Aviation. It's pretty cool. It's rad to hear the support though, because I think you have there's a lot of stories out there, and you probably saw this more than I did even, is you've got the parents that are just trying to live vicariously through their kid instead of providing something of value to their kid. And so they're the ones out driving so hard and saying, you need to train, you need to, and your dad was right in saying, you need to choose. Like, if we're here, but you got to pick which one you want. But it was like, even in your story, I'll support you in either one of them. We just need to choose. And to flip flop all the time and to be like chasing you between the skate park and the BMX track is too much work. But for a parent to be so supportive and just say, I just want to support you and help you ride bikes.
Yeah, and I would say, I got to give it to my dad. Like, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing without him anyway. So, uh, being supportive of that was super important. And the fact that, I was even kind of scared almost like, this is what we do. This is bike racing. Like, what is he going to think? And he was just like, no, like, I don't care what you do. Like, you want to ride trails, go ride trails. If you want to ride skate park, go ride skate park. But like, we are going racing every weekend. So if you don't want to do that, just like let us know. And,
Yeah,
that was definitely really important.
that's cool. That's such a cool perspective. Yeah, because I was actually just having a conversation yesterday with somebody who was super frustrated with a parent because he watched him lay into his kid and go, "You raced terribly, like that was so bad," and just yelling at his kid. And I grew up there's somebody a kid that I grew up racing with, and somehow my dad never saw this happen, but I just have no respect for the stepdad because he was always laying into his kid. He was making him cry, and he was one of my really close friends. And it was like he was probably having more fun on the track than anybody else. Like, everybody else was focused on competition. He wasn't winning, but he was always smiling, always having a good time. We were making jokes together, but he would just get laid into every time that he had a subpar performance, and he doesn't race any, he has no association with bikes anymore.
Yep. And I think, I saw that with some of my best friends, not in racing, but just in general with sports. And, from a young age, I had some buddies that were really good at baseball and really good at basketball. And their parents noticed that, but in the wrong way. And we're like, you need to train, you need to do this tonight, you need to shoot hoops for this amount of hours. And it's like, you put any pressure on a kid that they don't want to do, they're just going to end up despising what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I tell people in the sport of BMX, actually, I'd be curious your perspective on this, is I say that the difference is between a kid pushing their parents and a parent pushing their kid. And, at one point you have the parent that's like dragging them along, and at the other side you have the kid going, Mom, Dad, I want to train, I want to do this more. Can you help me or can you keep me accountable?
Yeah, and I would say that's like it's a funny fine line there because, like there was definitely days that I would say I didn't want to get to the track and my dad drugged me to the track and I ended up having a blast and felt way better afterwards. So it's like I would say as a kid, it's important to find that line, but as an adult too, like you kind of have to see like, hey, is this going to be better for them or is this going to like push them out of it? Because they might need a little motivation here and there to do it. And maybe they're not feeling happy or, motivated that day. But I'd say being around the community is really important to like bring you out of that, but also not push too hard because if you push too hard and force them to do it every time, then that's kind of like their thought is, hey, I'm being forced to do this rather than like, hey, I want to go race this weekend.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, and I think that some of that too comes with like I think there's a different dynamic being at the track and getting to ride versus the parents that are forcing their kids to go out and train. Because at that point, I think it just it can easily become a job and can drive kids away from it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch the perspectives on, and you've got parents that are just supportive no matter what. There was one interview that I did. His name's Mike Wagner, and he's got a son that is, I don't know, like 15, 16 years old, maybe 14. And and his son wants to train, and so dad's keeping him accountable and helping him out. But the kid came home, and I love this part in the episode is his son came home and he goes, "Dad, a bunch of my friends are going to the lake. Can I go with them?" And he goes, "Can I knock out my sprints? And then can I go down to the lake with them?" And his dad goes, "Absolutely not. What you're going to do is you're going to fill up the cooler with water and you're going to go down to the lake and you're going to go and you're just going to go play around on the boat." And I loved the perspective because he goes, "How many sprints is he doing comparably when he is out on his surfboard behind the boat?" And like he could have shut his kid down and he could have ruined it. And he goes, "If you do your sprints, they're going to be half-hearted. You're not going to be doing a great job. But what I want you to do is go have a good time, and then we'll do sprints tomorrow." I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. And that's like, dad bringing some of his knowledge to where it's like, hey, I appreciate you wanting to try, but go have fun and then, bring that motivation back tomorrow to keep training.
Yeah. Well, and then some of those stories. I mean, we all have stories with our friends and we're having conversations and they're like, "My dad made me train," and be like, "Oh, really?" Then for that kid to go, "Oh, yeah, I asked my dad if I could go to the lake and then do my sprints real quick. He said, no, I can't do my sprints, but he just told me to go to the lake." It's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So, yeah, it's fun. I enjoy hearing like your stories and your perspective, and obviously, it has kept you around. I was curious, was there any point where you stopped riding BMX bikes?
I would say there was like, I'm trying to remember how old I was. I think in that like 12, 13 range, somewhere in there. Um, I was racing a lot and I was riding motos with my dad and kind of doing all these different things. And I kind of just fell out of racing. I couldn't even tell you why back then, but maybe we didn't have the money to keep racing, or maybe we didn't have the time, or whatever it may be. But there was a few years that I fell out and I started trying to like skateboard and ride scooters and, just explore.
Yeah.
Well, then I kind of went to the skate park one day in Mount Vernon next to Bakerview. And I was like, "Hey, look, there's the track. They're racing." So then me and my dad went over there and we kind of met some more of the people at Bakerview. And then I kind of like fell in love with the racing side of things. But I would say like kind of what captivated me even before that was I was trying to ride skateboards and all these things at the skate park. But when I grabbed the BMX bike, it kind of felt natural right away because I already had those years of experience on the bike. So it was kind of like felt at home getting back on the bike. And that's where like I would say when I got back into it, that's where the skate park and the BMX racing were like kind of one and two. They were the two passions for me that kind of like, kept me going for a while.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, I think it makes sense when you talk about it that way of like you came back to the BMX bike and it just felt natural um and I think there was something for me as well that just like the bike would just felt relatable. It just I felt like home.
Exactly. And I think it's important to, in the sense that I think that time away from BMX was important for me because, if you do something too long, you can get burnt out on it. And maybe you're like, "Hey, I want to try something else, or I want to do something else. I don't want to go to the skate park anymore." And, I think that, couple year or two that I got out of BMX was important for me to really find that that's like, hey, this is my passion. Like, I love riding bikes. It's actually like good for my mental health. It's good for my physical health. And, you know, all my friends came from BMX racing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's neat to see some of the memories that you take with and some of the skills that it teaches you. And one of the things that I've talked about with my kids, that I where I started noticing all the things that BMX had contributed to my life. Um, do you remember Todd Taylor at the Burlington
Yeah.
track? Okay. So Todd Taylor was my mentor, my race mentor. He was my hero growing up. And I just remember looking up to him. And one of the things that I feel like BMX taught me was that I've never really seen a difference in age between friendships, and I've never seen age as a reason that we can't be friends. Whereas I'm sure you get this a lot. Is like you talk to people and they're like, "Well, you're quite a bit younger than me," or it's like I don't know why that matters. And BMX, I don't think has those barriers. And immediately, like we were at a track in just outside of Salt Lake City, and my daughter is like 4 years old, and she went up to well, I guess on the side of Todd Taylor is that I would go to school and I would tell people my friend Todd, and I would refer to him as my friend, even though he was the same age as my dad.
Yep.
And then we were in Utah and we had kind of just started racing like a month or two prior. And my daughter, I was setting up the trailer. They let us stay on their property. And my daughter goes up to the TO who she had literally talked to once, like an hour ago. And she goes, "Hey," I think she's 4 years old, 5 years old. And she goes, "Hey, do you have your bike?" "I do." "Do you want to race me?" "I'd love to."
Yeah.
And and like in all other in sports, in most sports setting, somebody who's older than you is going to be an authority figure. Whereas in BMX, people that are older than you can be an equal of sorts, and they can just be seen more as a friend.
Yeah. And I feel like that kind of boils back to the whole like, it's such a personal sport. And like, it's a team sport, but an individual sport where like, no matter the age, you see that they have the same passion that you do. And like at the end of the day, you're just riding a bicycle. So if they're wanting to ride and you're wanting to ride, like I was always friend like Tom was a handful of years older than me. And same story, like my parents in the beginning were like, Scotty, like you're 16. Why are you hanging out with all these 22, 23-year olds? And I'm like, they ride bikes and they're down. And they're like, well, why do they hang out with you? And I'm like, I ride bikes. Like I love riding bikes. And it wasn't like an age thing ever. It was like, these are the guys I want to hang out with because we have the same passion.
Yeah. And BMX I think is such a cool sport for that. And I think one of the things that I remember hearing Tom talk about that I thought was so cool from your standpoint was like as a as a kid, we know that like getting especially being at the skate park is like you have access to a lot of things at a younger age. You're hanging out there and people are drinking and stuff. And I just remember talking to Tom and he's like, no, he's like Scotty never got into that. He's like would he would be at the skate park and people are like, "You want something?" And Scotty's like, "No, because I won't be able to ride tomorrow." And
Yeah.
and I just thought that was super cool, like the way that it like bikes were something that kept you so focused that you weren't willing to like go down these rabbit holes of experimentation to try these things because you didn't want it to affect your next day.
Yeah. And I would say, like a lot of people have negative connotations with skate parks because, there's drugs or alcohol or, negative things happening. But on the same note, there's so many positive things happening where, maybe the one kid does go down a bad hole and he's got, something that's driving him to go there. But I would say just as equal as that, you're teaching kids to stay away from that and like, being around it and seeing it. For me, I was like, hey, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to go down that hole because you see, like, I was young and I would see older kids either progress or deprogress, like go down the wrong path. And it's like, okay, like don't go there. I want to be like these guys or vice versa. But yeah, biking was definitely I just wanted to ride as much as I could.
Yeah. I mean, I always remember having getting opportunities to like try things. And even now, my wife and I talk about it, and she's like, "Why didn't you?" And I'm like, "I just had no interest." Like people would ask me, and I just felt like, no, like I get enough from the adrenaline of riding my bike. I don't know why I need something else to try to help with that. Like, and I don't get to go. There's a good chance that I won't get to go ride tomorrow, and so it just never was of interest to me, and it kept me similarly to you, just kept me focused on, no, I just want to be able to go and play and hang out on my bike tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd say exactly that, where I just wanted to be there for the bike riding, and I wasn't necessarily there for all the negative things. I was just there for all the positive things.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that I would say the majority of the time I didn't even know what was going on. I think I was probably pretty oblivious to it because I was just there to ride. So,
Exactly.
but man, it's cool to chat with you. I was also curious on the building side, when you're laying out, like I've been friends with people who have done dirt work for years, so I would assume this is probably the case, but like when you're laying out a track and you dump a load of dirt somewhere and you're starting to visualize it all tamped down and packed out and people riding on it, like when you drop a bucket of dirt, can you quickly identify like, no, this is too close or this is too far away, things like that?
Um, yes and no. I would say a big part of it too for us is we're not scared to change what we make. I would say a lot of time we're building and we, build a couple features out and then I get out of the machine or we both get out and I stand in the middle and I'm like, let's change it. Like this doesn't look like I envisioned in my head, or this is actually closer or further away. And, the pump track we're working on this week, like I laid all the rollers out and then I'm like, I'm going to get rid of one of those and then push these all back a little bit and kind of readjust to where I'm not just building it once, maybe. I might be, but like I we like to take a second or third look at things and be like, okay, I'm actually going to push this out, or does this berm look right? I might have finished the whole berm and spent all day packing on it, and then I'm like, nah, it just doesn't look right. Like I'm going to remachine the second half of that berm and push it out so it feels proper.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, to be able to go through that, because it is like you were talking about earlier, being a canvas, and the shovel, or in this case a machine, is the tool that you're using, but to be able to have enough foresight to go, no, we're going to tear this out even though it's more work, we're going to pull this out so that we make it the way that it needs to be.
Exactly. And I feel like even Shire, our trails, um, building a set of BMX jumps is just that. Like we machined it and you work on it all winter and then you ride during the summer and you're like, oh, well, jump number 3 doesn't feel quite right. And jump number 5 is, too big or too small. So that constant evolution to make them better, you're changing your finished product. So like now when I look at building, it's not like, hey, I'm going to build it and we come back and change it later. It's like, okay, I can kind of picture that this one's not going to be right or not going to feel the way the rest of them feel. So like, let's change it now so we don't need to change it later.
That's cool. Yeah, and I can appreciate that. Um, yeah, there's a lot. Like I said, I can't build trails that well. I can't build pump tracks. I just don't have the experience with it. But it is really fun getting to see some of your projects that have come to life. Do you have a favorite project that you've done
Man,
so far?
I people ask us this all the time, and me and Spencer are it's it's kind of wild to think about how many projects we've done in the last few years. Um, I'd say what's interesting about what we do is it's not necessarily like we have such a broad spectrum of projects where I'd say like a third of our projects are, pump tracks, municipalities, city stuff. I would say another third of that's like mountain bike trails, private backyard trails. People like you and your kids, if you wanted a pump track, I'd say a big part of our business model is going and building those for these backyards. But another side of our business is we do probably like a third like video projects for professional riders. And that's a really fun side of things where it's, you know, I get to build a pump track and I'm thinking about like sustainability and drainage and like a 4-year-old and a 15-year-old and a 50-year-old riding it. Where this video project, we'll do a project for Brandon Semenuk and it doesn't need to last. It doesn't need to drain. It doesn't need to do anything. Brandon's going to ride it 3 times and then we're going to plow it. So it's like you can literally put all your effort into like creativity and making this like work of art that's like maybe no one else in the world can ride. So that's like pretty fun. I would say one of my favorite projects is a project that's not released to the public yet. But we've started putting teasers on Instagram, but we're going to bring a Fest Series event to the USA for the first time. And we're bringing that to Skagit County, and like some of the biggest pros from the world are going to come this summer. And like, that'll be really cool to see.
That is so rad. You sent me some of those videos of you guys hitting those lines, and it is absolutely wild. Like
I would
I'm
compare
so
it to
excited.
a moto jump. Like it's a 12-foot metal ramp with a 70-foot gap. So there's, that feeling is something you will never experience unless you ride something that big.
Wow. Yeah, I remember like one of the first, I don't know how long, is it 4 or 5 years that Fest has been going on?
It's
Something
been
like
going
that.
on for a while.
Okay.
I
Maybe
don't
longer than
know.
that.
Yeah, I don't know on the top of my head.
But I think like was the beginning of it, would it have been like Andrea Lukandagi?
Yeah, and
That
they back in the day they did have some. They had one in California and they did one in Oregon, and there was a couple in the USA, but the last handful of years they've all been overseas.
yeah.
And I'd say growing up, it was definitely a dream of mine to like, I want to go to a fest event, I want to build a fest event, or I didn't even think about building one back in the day, but when we got into, building more mountain bike stuff, it was like, hey, that'd be really cool to build, but who knows if it'll ever happen.
That's so cool. Man, I'm excited. So yeah, I mean people will just have to follow along and find out more for more information. Um do you want to tell everybody the page that they have to follow to, or are we keeping that a secret?
No, we're releasing all that now, and like the event's in August. So if you follow Shire Built or if you follow the page Woolly Fest, um, we've teamed up with Talus, Turk, and Ryan, his other buddy, and we've kind of, they came to us with their vision and pulling their sponsor support to like help fund this project. And without them, we wouldn't be doing it, and without us, like as a whole team, um, and the landowner of the property too, like this landowner that owns where the fest event's going was just one of our customers, and we were building trails for him because he rode one of our mountain bike trails and wanted to have that on his property. And then when that got built, he was like, hey, what do you think about building some campsites? And so we started building campsites so people could go on Hip Camp and rent these campsites. And when you rent the campsite, you get to ride the trails. And that started slowly evolving. And, he started having us out more and more. And he's just same as us. Like he loves mountain biking. He loves being a part of the sport, but he kind of fell out of it for a while and he's back into it. And when we presented him with the idea, like, hey, we might have a chance to bring Fest to the US, like, could we do this here? He's like, let's do it. I'm like 100% down. So without him, we wouldn't be doing it. Without the sponsors, we wouldn't be doing it. So it's just kind of this like perfect storm.
That's awesome. So cool. Man, I'm so excited, like just for you guys, but then also just for the event in general. Like, you guys have some really cool things happening. I mean, some of the builds that you did, I saw a couple of the photos of some of the work you did for Brandon Semenuk, and just some really cool projects that you guys have gotten to be a part of recently.
Yeah, I would, that again, like I would never expect we'd be working for Brandon Semenuk and Christian Regal and all these pros that, when I was a BMXer, I looked up to Christian and thought he was one of the sickest dudes riding BMX. And, come to find a few years later when he got into mountain biking, he chose us to be builders because of our BMX background, where, he had a BMX background, we had a BMX background. So he kind of was like, hey, you guys will have the same vision as I do, to where like we can do a crossover of mountain bike and BMX, which ended up being his first project we did, was called Crossover.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. That is really cool. I'll have to go and look at that. Was that a video that he shot?
Yeah, so that's a
Okay.
video. If you look up just Crossover Christian Regal, that was one of our first like big video projects we did with him.
Okay. Yeah, because I'll have to go and look at that because I remember seeing it come out. I just guess I didn't know that it was something that you guys had worked on with him, but now I'll have to go and watch it with a different viewpoint.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. And that, that too is like, he was definitely the start of us getting into the video side of things. And without Christian, we wouldn't be doing all these projects for Brandon and Reed and all these other riders where, he took a chance with us because of BMX. And that just kind of showed, the passion and like the trail building side of things.
That's so cool, man. So for people to follow you, you mentioned Shire Built, which is Shire, and then Built is spelt correctly, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. And then you personally, how do they find you?
My page is Scotty Beham X. It was kind of a play on words because like Bellingham is Beham and Beham sounds like BMX only. So it was like, to me, I was just like, hey, this is like kind of our crew. And Spencer's Spencer Beham X. So it was kind of like the few of us all had the same title with just our different front name. And yeah,
That's awesome. It's pretty cool. Man, well, I appreciate your time and, getting to chat with you and, getting to hear some of your story. Like there's still so much of me. I feel bad that I just don't remember you, but I just don't remember being at the track together. But it's cool to hear that we were. I just, yeah, don't remember. Maybe it's just because we were a couple of years apart in age, but it's pretty cool. Like all the similar like stories and connections that we have.
exactly. And that's, I mean, I feel you there because like, going back to the track, there's even people that I was like friends with that you look back and there's so many people that you met and see. And, CTAC would have like 40 motos on a weeknight sometimes. And it's like, you've seen those people, but like being that small of a kid, like it's kind of hard to retain all those names and faces and memories, but like we were there.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is like though I think age becomes less of an issue as when you're in BMX. As you know, like when you're a kid and you're like, I mean, I was like 9, 10, 11 years old. And so even a couple of years is a huge gap when you're a kid. Like you're like, oh, those little
Yeah,
kids are, you just don't think about hanging out with them unless you have siblings their age or whatever. And so yeah, it's definitely a different, almost just a different season of life at some point. But no, it's been really cool, like catching up with you and getting to hear about some of the projects that you're working on. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and chatting with me.
yeah, thank you for having me on, and I had fun telling my story, and I look forward to hearing more people's stories on your podcast.
Right on. Cool. Well, thank you. And yeah, have a great day. And I'm sure we'll cross paths soon enough.
Sweet, I appreciate it, and yeah, let's hopefully we chat again soon.
Thank you for joining us in today's episode. It is because of people like you and our sponsors who make this whole thing possible because they have a desire to see the sport grow. If you would like to get involved in the mission of BMX Breakthrough, you can start by going to your local track, find a way to volunteer, help out, and serve there. Or you can go to our website, bmxbreakthrough.com, in order to donate, find out about sponsorship, or learn more.